Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how we can build a Power Virtual Agent using dynamic chaining and generative actions. What does that mean? Well, it's new functionality, it's in preview. Instead of building out topics with trigger words, you're going to use Gen AI in order to identify the appropriate action, whether that's a standard or a premium or a custom action, or a Power Automate flow to call to deliver that functionality to your end user. So using this new functionality, the Power Virtual Agent will dynamically choose an action and use generative AI to populate the properties of that action. So I'm going to build you a demo with 3 different actions, a weather API, a jokes API, and also a PowerPoint slide flow. And before you know it, you'll have a fully functioning Power Virtual Agent that's able to deliver up some pretty nifty functionality using this new feature. So if that's something that interests you, please make sure you like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's jump into the demo. So I'm going to kick things off from our recently rebranded Copilot Studio. I'm going to create a new Copilot. We'll give that a name. And whilst you can see here we can add websites for conversational boosting with generative answers, today's demonstration is all about dynamic chaining with generative actions. So I'm going to create this and then we'll have a look at the new functionality. So with the bot now set up, the first thing to note is if I jump across onto the Generative AI tab, we can see we have a slightly redesigned screen. It includes boosting conversational coverage for generative answers, which is not what the demo is about, but it also includes this dynamic chaining with generative actions, which is the exciting bit, the preview bit, that will enable us to bring in flows and actions using generative technology. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that and I'll hit save. So those changes saved, if I jump across onto my plugins preview, and for those that were eagle-eyed, you might have noticed a new icon at the top here, which is the new tracing mode. We have a screen here that now shows us all of our topics and all of our plugins and new trigger types. So previously we had triggers that were based on the topic trigger words, but now you'll note that these topics are based on dynamic chaining. And what that means is the description of our topic. If I go into the goodbye topic right now, you can see the description here says that this tool can handle queries like bye for now, bye now, goodbye, no thank you, and goodbye. What we previously knew as trigger words are being replaced by natural language, so our Copilot can recognize the topics to identify and use in this more dynamic conversation string. So if I jump back into this new plugin screen and we have a look at the plugins tab here, you'll see at the moment I have no plugins, but today what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a plugin for the weather. I'm going to build a custom connector, which will have a third-party API for jokes, and I'll also bring in a flow, one that I recently built that would generate a PowerPoint slide deck from a description. So I'll show you how we can bring all 3 of these into our chatbot today so we can have a generative actions conversation using dynamic chaining. So at the moment, if I go into the test on the left-hand side and type into the bot, tell me a joke, for instance, of course it's going to say, I can't answer that in some description. Oh, you're welcome. Very interesting. But if I try and ask it for the weather in Aberdeen, for instance, again, it's going to have absolutely no clue. And therefore, it's saying, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to help you with that. Can you try rephrasing? Because of course, it doesn't have any logic. And traditionally, we would have created a topic about the weather. We would have called a flow. We would have got the answer back. And then we would have given a standard response. But for this, I'm going to go into add an action. And I'm going to add in the weather action. So what we see here are all the actions that we have across the Power Platform, the ones that you see in Power Automate and Power Apps. And as I scroll down, we can see at the top we have Get Forecast for today. So I can click on that and add this action. And whilst there are a series of default values that are accepted, we can go to Next here. We can have a quick look at some of these action details. We've got the plugin name. The important bit in order for Power Virtual Agents to recognize the topic is this model description, so getting the forecast for the current day in the specified location. But as we scroll down again, there are inputs and outputs. So inputs refer to the input properties or parameters of that action. So of course, to get the weather, you need to know the location. You also need to know the units. And if I go into edit, we can see at the moment both the location and the units are set dynamically using AI. But what I'm going to do for the units is to change that to set a value. It's asking me, do I want to confirm? And that value I'm going to choose as imperial. So I'll go ahead and save that and then we can have a look briefly at outputs. Again, if there's anything that you want to store and use further on in your conversation, you can go into edit here and you can manually add the outputs available from this particular action. We also have the ability to respond to the user after running that action, and of course I would like to know what the weather is. So at this point in time we have a couple of options, or 3 options. AI can generate it. AI can generate it as an adaptive card, which is currently grayed out but will soon be available. You can create your own message, or you can create an adaptive card. So I'm going to leave it on the dynamically generate a message, and this will really help demonstrate the power of this new functionality. So I'll go back to the previous page, I'll hit finish, and we'll bring this action into our new chatbot. So previously where I've asked what the weather is, if again I ask what is the weather, but I won't ask in a particular town or city, the nature of dynamic chaining is that it recognizes the fact that I want to access this Microsoft weather action, and it's going to search for any of the properties that are missing. Now remember I pointed out at the top there's a new icon, it's the new tracing mode. If I click on that, we can see that there's missing information for that action, hence the question here from our bot. And if I put in Aberdeen, we will hopefully get a weather forecast for Aberdeen. So there we go, heavy rain, which is correct, and we have a high and low temperature. Now if I was to ask what's the weather in Dundee, for instance, I could say how about Dundee? So I've not actually asked about the weather, but I've followed up on this conversation that I've currently got going with a bot, and you can see already that it's identified we're in the context of weather, and therefore it's searched for Dundee in that particular action, returning to me a summary. Now if I was to ask for the top temperature in Edinburgh, again this is a weather related question. Let's see if it'll identify specifically the top temperature in Edinburgh today is 46 degrees Fahrenheit. So rather than giving me a summary about the weather, it's recognized the fact that we're talking about the weather here. It's called that endpoint. That endpoint will return a host of information in the standard output that you would see in Power Automate, for instance. And because I've asked specifically about that top temperature, I've got a very specific response about that top temperature in Edinburgh today. So that quickly demonstrates the nature of dynamic chaining and generative answers. We've had a conversation about the weather, we've simply attached an action, we've fixed one of those input values, and then the location is completely dynamic based on the questions that I'm asking the bot. So let's now see if we can bring a Power Automate flow into our chatbot. So if we jump back across onto our plugins, I'll go into add here and we'll go and add in a plugin. And at the top right, you can see I can create a new flow. Now the good thing about this, if I create the new flow, just like you get the experience in Power Apps and other places, we get the pop-up with the new designer for Power Automate, and we have the trigger to run a flow from Copilot, and we also have the respond to Copilot. So if you think about the way that this works, we have the trigger. You can pass in inputs from your conversation into your flow. Then you can do lots of stuff in the middle here by adding actions, and then you can respond back to your Copilot to let it know that that particular flow has completed. Now there are timeouts on this. I think it's 120 seconds, 2 minutes before your flow will time out. So make sure that whatever you do between the trigger and the response, it's going to happen promptly. Anything that you think is going to run beyond that, you can run after this particular response, and I'm going to show that in the flow that I've built based on the video that I did on generating PowerPoint slide decks. So with that flow now opened, the flow called Create Me a PowerPoint Slide PPTX, you can see I have that run a flow from Copilot. If I go into parameters, I have a request for both an email and the requirements. The reason for the email is because I want to notify that user proactively that their slide deck has been created. And then I have the requirements, which is basically the brief description of the slide deck. Now these two parameters and descriptions here are very important because it helps the AI model recognize the data that it's looking to extract and pass into this action dynamically. So if you've ever used the descriptions here before and been quite flippant about it and not bothered, well, for generative AI, make sure you give it something that's meaningful and help that language model identify your properties. So we have our input properties for our run a flow, we have a response. In this case, is just a basic response back to say it's okay. And then we have the contents of that demonstration I've done in my previous video, which I'll have in my description, but it includes keys for various APIs, and it uses the OpenAI service to generate some slides, populate that slide content, merge the slides, create a file, and also hit up a text-to-speech service so we can get a recorded audio file. Now, at the very end of it, you'll see I have an action here called post a message into chat or channel. And the reason I've got that in here is because it allows me to post a proactive message back into that chatbot. So you'll see that I've configured it here to post as the Power Virtual Agent. It's currently a preview value for the post as. Previously, you've probably used a Flowbot or a user. So we're posting as a Power Virtual Agent. We're posting in a chat with a bot, and we're posting to the bot that I've called the GenAI Actions POC. Now you'll note that I'm pulling through the email address. That's the reason why in the trigger I have the email, because I need to know which user I'm notifying in the chatbot that their slides have been created. And you'll see that the slides have been created and are available here, and to play the transcript, click here. Now there is some HTML sitting behind this. I actually built it in the classic designer, so at the moment it's not editable, but you can see if I hover my mouse over, there is a dynamic file path there. So for both the two links, we have a link to the output of the body path, which is for the create file of the PowerPoint file and the create file for the audio file. So HTML, unfortunately, at this point in time, needs to be updated in the old classic designer using this switch. But that's all I wanted to cover today about this particular flow. I want to jump back into my Power Virtual Agent and show you how we can now use the power of these generative actions and dynamic chaining to create a conversation and trigger the creation of our PowerPoint slide deck. So I've created my new Power Automate. It's called Create Me a PowerPoint Slide Deck, which we can see here. If I couldn't find it, of course, I could search or I could filter. And if I click on that particular flow, I can bring it in, and just like I did with the weather, you can see again I have a description. So it's a service to generate slide decks or PowerPoint presentations, which will enable the AI to identify the particular use for this flow. And then as we move down, we've got inputs, the email and the requirements, and again outputs if I wanted to save anything from the response. But like before, I want to go into the inputs, and where the email has been set up to retrieve a dynamic value, I'm actually wanting to use a system variable. If I go to set as value, we can confirm here, click on selecting a variable into system, and because I've enabled the security and the Teams channel, it means I can use the property for user.email. So I'm actually able to now pull across the email address of the user in Teams that has sent that request for the Power Automate, which therefore means that they will get the notification when their set of slides have been generated. And the same would apply with any instance where you want to use that proactive messaging within Power Automate. So I can hit save and we can go ahead with finish, and this is now bringing that into our Power Virtual Agent. We can now see the flow added in there to create me a PowerPoint slide. I could of course make the request here from our test designer, but what I've actually done is I brought it into Teams, and we can see it's already attached here. I've been playing about with it earlier to make sure it all works, of course, as I always do. And if I ask the question, what is the weather, for instance, we can just test that same functionality and hopefully it'll ask me the city that I'm interested in. So what's the location? I'm going to go with Aberdeen again. So there we go. The weather forecast is still heavy rain and a high temperature of 47 degrees Fahrenheit. But what about, can you create me a PowerPoint deck? And of course I've got an input parameter, so I've not provided the description. So Generative AI has said, what is the brief description of the slide deck? So because I'm hot off of watching the pantomime in Aberdeen, let's go and ask for a slide deck about the history of the HMT Theatre in Aberdeen and Pantos on a 5-page slide deck. We'll go ahead and hit enter, and we can see that our slides are being produced as we speak. So if we go back into Power Automate and we go back onto the details pane, we should be able to see that our flow has been triggered. It's currently running, there we go, 16 seconds ago. So if I pop that open, all that's happening now is everything that's within this scope is running, which is all the generative AI stuff, the stuff that I've demonstrated in my previous video. but ultimately it's grabbing some slide content based on that prompt that I provided, which has come in via our trigger. So you can see the email address, you can see the trigger about the history of HMT Theatre in Aberdeen and Pantos on a 5-page slide deck. That's going through this process. It will generate some images using generative AI, merge the presentation slides, create a couple of files, and then if I go back to our Power Virtual Agent, when it's complete, I should get that proactive message popping up on my chat in Teams, because I've added this virtual agent into Teams to let me know that my slide deck has been created. And remember, this is a personal experience. This bot is available to potentially everyone in the organization, but because it's me that's made that request, it's me that's going to get that notification because I've grabbed that email address from that user variable as a result of using the bot in Teams. So we can see now that the slides have been generated and that they're available. If I click here, I can also play the transcript. If we jump back onto the flow, we can see the time it took for all these stages. So it did actually take 7 minutes to produce, which if I put all of these actions between the trigger and the response, the overall flow would have timed out, the bot would have timed out, and this whole setup wouldn't have worked. So by responding immediately back to our Copilot to let it know that that process has been kicked off, we're ultimately using this post a message back to a chat or a channel. Proactive messaging it's called, with Power Virtual Agents, which is a preview feature. It lets me target that bot, that particular recipient, in which case is me, and a personalized message which includes the links to those 2 files. If I go and click on the link, of course, it will pop open our PowerPoint presentation, which is now opened up for us on screen. So this isn't the actual HMT Theatre. Of course, it's all AI generated images, but some interesting points there throughout this slide deck that's been generated using that process. And of course, if I click on this link here, we'll get the audio file. Today, we begin a journey into the rich history of HMT Theatre, a remarkable venue in Aberdeen. So that wasn't my voice, that was text-to-speech based on the generative AI that was produced for that very simple prompt that I provided to our Power Virtual Agent in Teams, and a request about the history of HMT Theatre in Aberdeen and Pantos on a 5-page slide deck. So hopefully you can see how we've managed to bring in that functionality into a Power Virtual Agent using a single Power Automate flow. The input parameters, one of which is fixed, the email address based on the user.email, and then we have the dynamic value, which is obviously the description or purpose of the PowerPoint deck that we're producing. So finally, I would like to try and bring in this joke API, which is quite simple. It's an API that produces a random joke. If I refresh on screen here, we'll see that we're getting lots of different jokes off the back of it. So I'm going to build a custom connector using this API, and then we'll bring that action from that custom connector into our bot, and then it'll be able to start producing jokes and make us laugh. So the first thing to do is for me to grab this URL. So I'll highlight and copy, Control C. I need to make sure I'm in that same development. So it's a US environment here, and I'm going to create a new connector from blank, and we can call it the joke connector. I'll continue with that, and the first thing that you might notice is we have a new screen, stage 4 for AI plugin. So this is important, a bit like the description of the input parameters and the purpose of the flow, making sure that you provide data in here so that the model can recognize its purpose. So just like you'd normally do with a custom connector, you can specify the icon color and give it a description. I'm going to call this the joke connector. And then I need to put in the host. Now I've got the full URL here. I need to trim off the https://. So I only need the beginning of the URL so I can strip back this jokes random. The base URL can be jokes, and the endpoint that I'm wanting to hit for the random joke is random. So I need to grab just that word random. Hopefully all of that will make more sense in a minute. So the host is this URL, the base is for jokes. Security, there's no authentication. So whilst in a normal enterprise scenario, you might set up OAuth or use an API key, I'm going with a public joke API here, so no need for me to set that up. I can go into the definition, and this is where I'm going to create a new action. We're going to give it the name random joke. The description is very important, so tell us a random joke. and then their operation ID is going to be random joke. So of course I could add multiple actions in here based on what the API can do. It can tell specific jokes based on categories. It can produce a random joke, which is what I'm wanting to bring into my chatbot today. And if you had an API that equally had loads of different actions, you could bring them in. So the next bits, we need to import from a sample. So I need to get based on that specific URL. So here you would paste in the full URL, in this case, this one here. And then the header is based on what we're passing in, which is nothing. So I can go ahead and import, and we will see hopefully everything going in okay. We can go into the default response, import from a sample. We've already got a sample here over on this tab, so I can Control C on that tab and jump across into here and paste it in. So this is what the response is going to look like. 4 different properties in this object. We can import it, and that's all we need to do on this particular screen. Over on the AI plugin, we need to give it a description again. So tell us a joke, and the purpose or the description here is to provide a random joke from a public API. So this is all in preview at the moment, but it's going to help with our model identify the purpose of our connector, the purpose of the actions that we have on that connector as we bring them in. Now I can just click on create connector, and then finally I can go ahead and test. So with the connector now created, I can click on the test tab here. I need to create a connection so that I can get access to this as me as a user. The connector has been built by me, it's been shared to me, therefore I can create a connection to it, and then I can test the operation, and we can see we've got a response back with our joke body. So everything is set up working for our random joke action in our new custom connector called the joke connector. So if I jump over onto our bot again, and if I ask it to tell me a joke, we'll probably confuse the living daylights out of it, because of course there isn't an action there that it can use for this purpose. And in fact, it's asked if we want to end the conversation. And if I look at the tracing mode, it's gone down that goodbye topic based on some of these phrases in the description. But instead, if we go into plugins and we go and add, and we go and choose our joke action that we've created. So I'll search for joke. You can see that there's my random joke action for the joke connector. And it will bring through the details. Hopefully, if I go to next, the model is based on tell us a random joke, which is obviously the string that I set, or the description I set when configuring the connector. I'm not going to change any inputs as there are none, and I'm not going to save the output anywhere. So I'm just going to go ahead with a finish. And by doing this, it should then give our bot the ability to tell some random jokes. So if I refresh my bot, and I'll ask it to tell me a joke. And even though I've got the spelling wrong, hopefully it will still recognize my intent. Why can't bicycles stand on their own? They are too tired. Hilarious. How about tell me another? Well, again, too fast on the keys, but hopefully it's recognizing my intent. Good. Why or what do elves post on social media? Elfies. If we look at that tracing mode, you can see it's calling out the random joke action. If I was now to switch conversation and ask about how warm is it in Edinburgh, it should recognize that I'm asking specifically about the weather forecast. And as you can see in the dynamic chaining log, we have the fact it's pulled in that forecast action for Edinburgh and brought back specifically the top temperature. If I was then to ask to create me a slide deck, we can see that it will now hopefully choose the action related to creating a slide deck. We have some missing information, which is the requirements of that second parameter of our slide deck. And of course, if I provide the details of the slide deck, my flow would get launched and it would create me a slide deck and pop back a proactive message into my Teams chat to let me know when those slides have been generated and when that transcript is available to play.